You keep sabotaging your own healing, not because you're weak, not because you're broken, but because the very thing you're trying to fix is the thing that's trying to save you. Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakens. Carl Jung knew something we've forgotten. The shadow isn't your enemy, it's your compass. Vivian sits in her therapist's office for the 4th month running. She's done everything right: meditation apps, gratitude journals, boundary workshops. She's read every self-help book on healing trauma, practiced affirmations in the mirror, bought crystals that promise to cleanse her energy. And she still feels fake, not broken. Fake, like she's performing healing instead of actually healing. Like underneath all the spiritual bypassing and positive psychology, there's still this raw, angry, desperate part of her that refuses to be tamed by sage and good intentions. Maybe you know this feeling. The exhaustion of trying to love and light your way out of patterns that keep pulling you back into the same cycles. The shame of being too much, even in your healing journey. Here's what Vivian didn't know yet. What our culture of surface-level wellness doesn't want you to know. The reason your healing feels fake isn't because you're doing it wrong. It's because you're only healing half of yourself. There are 2 versions of you walking through life right now, and they're at war. The first version, let's call her your persona, is the one everyone sees. She's responsible, agreeable, always putting others first. She smiles when she's frustrated, says, "It's fine," when it's not, apologizes for existing. She's the good daughter, the perfect employee, the understanding friend who never has needs of her own. Carl Jung psychology teaches us that the persona is the mask we wear to belong, to be accepted, to survive in a world that punishes authenticity. And for a while, it works. But underneath that mask lives your shadow. She's the one who gets angry when boundaries are crossed. She's the one who feels envious when others get what you secretly want. She's the one who's tired of performing, tired of shrinking, tired of being nice, when what she really wants to do is scream. And here's the thing about the shadow that Carl Jung psychology reveals: she's not your flaw, she's your power. But we've been taught to reject her, to push her down, to spiritually bypass her with positive thinking and toxic positivity. We call her anger unhealed trauma. We call her envy low vibration. We call her need for rest laziness. What if I told you that every emotion you've labeled as negative is actually information that your anger isn't evidence that you're unhealed? It's evidence that your boundaries have been crossed, that your envy isn't proof you're ungrateful. It's your soul pointing toward what it actually desires. You are not exhausted because life is hard. You are exhausted because you are constantly performing a version of yourself that isn't real. Think about the last time you said yes when you meant no. The last time you smiled through something that hurt. The last time you pretended to be okay when you were falling apart inside. That split you feel between who you are and who you think you should be. That's not a character flaw. That's the war between your persona and your shadow. And until you stop trying to eliminate one half of yourself, you'll keep sabotaging every attempt at genuine healing. Take a moment. Think about the version of yourself you hide from others. What does she want? What does she need? What would she say if she wasn't afraid of being rejected? You call it empathy, but maybe it's just the way you disappear. Here's where everything changes. Are you ready? Your shadow isn't your problem. Your shadow is your solution. Let me tell you about Justin. 32 years old, successful marketing director, everyone's favorite coworker. Justin prided himself on being the chill guy, never complained, always accommodated, rolled with every last-minute deadline and unreasonable request. Until he started having panic attacks in bathroom stalls. His body was screaming what his mouth refused to say, "This isn't okay." But instead of listening, Justin doubled down. More meditation, more therapy focused on managing stress, more trying to fix his anxiety problem. It wasn't until he started exploring Carl Jung psychology that Justin realized something revolutionary. His panic wasn't a disorder, it was information. His body was protecting him from a life that was slowly killing his soul. The shadow that Justin had been avoiding wasn't his anxiety. It was his rage. Rage at being taken for granted. Rage at being invisible. Rage at a system that rewarded his self-sacrifice with more demands for self-sacrifice. But here's what Carl Jung psychology teaches us about the shadow. It's not just about what we repress. It's about what we project. Every time Justin felt irritated by difficult coworkers who set boundaries, he was looking at his disowned power. Every time he judged people for being selfish or demanding, he was rejecting the parts of himself that knew how to advocate for his needs. What if the people who trigger you the most are showing you exactly who you're afraid to become? The coworker who says no without guilt. The friend who doesn't apologize for having standards. The stranger who takes up space unapologetically. You don't hate them because they're wrong. You hate them because they're free. Think about someone who really gets under your skin. Someone whose behavior feels selfish or inappropriate or too much. Now ask yourself, what would your life look like if you had even 10% of their audacity? This is where Carl Jung psychology gets radical. The shadow isn't just about integrating your repressed emotions. It's about reclaiming the power you've been giving away every time you choose to be liked over being real. Your envy is a treasure map. It's pointing toward the life your soul actually wants. Your anger is a boundary system. It's telling you where you've been violated and where you need to protect yourself. Your laziness is resistance to a life that doesn't nourish you. But we've been trained to see these feelings as evidence that we need more healing, more fixing, more managing. What if they're evidence that we need more honoring? Every time you stay silent, when you want to speak, you teach the world that your voice doesn't matter. The shadow you're avoiding isn't your wound, it's your wisdom. Knowing your shadow isn't enough. Integration requires action. This is where most people get stuck. They journal about their patterns, they talk about their triggers in therapy, they intellectually understand their wounds and can articulate exactly why they people-please or self-sabotage or attract unavailable partners. But understanding and embodying are two different countries, and most of us get lost at the border between knowing and doing. Carl Jung psychology teaches us that individuation becoming whole isn't a thinking process. It's a living process. It's not something you understand your way into. It's something you act your way into choice by choice, boundary by boundary, truth by truth. Let me tell you about Madison. She spent 2 years in therapy talking about her people-pleasing patterns. She could articulate exactly why she said yes when she meant no. How her childhood had programmed her to prioritize others' comfort over her own needs. How she'd learned that love was conditional on her usefulness. How her nervous system had been wired to detect and prevent other people's disappointment, even at the cost of her own well-being. She understood her attachment style, her family dynamics, her trauma responses. She could name her triggers and explain her patterns to anyone who would listen. She had insights stacked on insights, awareness layered on awareness, but she kept saying yes when she meant no. She kept staying late at work when she was exhausted. She kept lending money to friends who never paid her back. She kept hosting family gatherings that stressed her out for weeks. She kept agreeing to plans she didn't want to make with people whose company she didn't particularly enjoy. Until one Tuesday afternoon, when her boss asked her to work late for the third time that week. Madison opened her mouth to say, "Of course, no problem," the automatic response that had been programmed into her since childhood. But instead, something different happened. Instead, she heard herself say, "No, I won't be able to do that." The words came out before she could stop them, before she could soften them with explanations or apologies or alternatives. Just a simple, clear no. Her boss blinked. "Oh, okay. I'll ask someone else." That was it. No drama, no anger, no catastrophic consequences. The world didn't end. Her boss wasn't happy, but he found someone else. Madison went home at her normal time and cried not from guilt, but from the shock of hearing her own voice, her real voice, the one that had been buried under decades of conditioning. That was her first act of shadow integration, not thinking about boundaries, not journaling about boundaries, not talking about boundaries in therapy, actually having a boundary. This is what Carl Jung psychology calls the transcendent function, the moment when conscious awareness meets unconscious wisdom and creates something new. Madison didn't just understand her pattern, she interrupted it. She didn't just know what she needed to do, she did it. Your shadow wants to be lived, not just understood. It wants to speak through your choices, not just your insights. It wants to show up in your actions, not just your awareness. What would happen if you stopped performing empathy and started practicing discernment? What would happen if you stopped apologizing for your needs and started honoring them? What would happen if you stopped explaining yourself and started trusting that your truth is enough? The shadow integration process isn't about becoming perfect. It's about becoming whole. It's about letting the parts of you that have been in exile come home. But here's what nobody tells you about shadow work. It's terrifying. Not because you might discover something terrible about yourself, but because you might discover something powerful. Because the moment you start honoring your authentic self, the people who benefited from your performance start getting uncomfortable. The moment you start setting boundaries, the people who enjoyed your boundaryless existence start pushing back. The moment you start taking up space, the people who preferred you small start trying to shrink you back down. The people who loved you for your compliance will resist you for your authenticity. And that resistance, that's not evidence that you're doing something wrong. That's evidence that you're doing something real. This is where most people retreat back into their familiar patterns. They mistake other people's discomfort with their growth as evidence that they should stop growing. They mistake pushback as proof that they're being selfish or difficult. But Jung said, "You are what you do not. What you say, you'll do." Your healing isn't measured by your insights. It's measured by your courage to act differently, even when, especially, when it makes other people uncomfortable. Start small, but start. One conversation where you tell the truth instead of telling people what they want to hear. One boundary where you say no without offering a detailed explanation or alternative solution. One moment where you honor your actual feelings instead of performing emotional regulation for everyone else. The shadow doesn't need to be fixed or healed or transcended. It needs to be invited to the table. It needs to be given a voice in your decisions. It needs to be allowed to influence your choices and guide your actions. Because the shadow isn't the part of you that's wrong. The shadow is the part of you that's been silenced. And silence isn't healing. Integration is. Here's what they don't tell you about healing. The deepest healing happens when you stop trying to heal. Fear is the gatekeeper of every authentic transformation. Not the fear of pain. We've all gotten comfortable with pain. It's the fear of power, the fear of being fully seen, the fear of discovering that you're not broken, you're just buried, the fear of discovering that you don't need to be saved, you need to be unleashed. Vivian, the woman from our earlier story, spent months trying to figure out why her healing journey felt so performative. She was doing everything right, according to the wellness industry: therapy sessions twice a week, meditation retreats, journaling practices, energy healing, somatic therapy, EMDR for her trauma. She had a whole toolkit of healing modalities and a vocabulary to match. But underneath all of it was this persistent feeling that she was still hiding, still performing, still trying to be the right kind of person, even in her healing. One day, her therapist asked her a simple question that changed everything. What are you afraid would happen if you stopped trying to be healed? Vivian sat with that question for what felt like hours, and then, like a dam breaking, the truth came flooding out. People would see how angry I actually am. They'd see that I'm not the understanding, forgiving person everyone thinks I am. They'd see that I resent my mother for making me her therapist when I was 7 years old. They'd see that I'm furious at my ex for wasting 3 years of my life with his emotional unavailability. They'd see that I hate how my job drains my soul and I fantasize about quitting every single day. They'd see that I judge people who have what I want because I'm too scared to go after it myself. They'd see that I'm not grateful for my life, I'm suffocating in it. There it was. The thing she'd been trying to heal away wasn't her wound, it was her power. She wasn't afraid of being broken, she was afraid of being whole. Because wholeness included all the parts of her she'd been taught were unacceptable. She wasn't afraid of her trauma. She was afraid of her rage. She wasn't afraid of her pain. She was afraid of her desires. She wasn't afraid of her wounds. She was afraid of her wants, because rage meant she'd have to stop making excuses for people who hurt her. Desires meant she'd have to risk disappointment by going after what she wanted. Wants meant she'd have to acknowledge that her life as it was wasn't enough. Carl Jung psychology teaches us that individuation isn't about transcending our humanity. It's about embracing all of it, the light and the dark, the calm and the storm, the parts of us that are easy to love and the parts that are inconvenient for others. Your fear isn't telling you to stop. Your fear is telling you where you need to go. Jung said, "Where your fear is, there is your task." Maybe you're afraid of being seen as selfish if you start honoring your needs. But what if selfishness is just self-respect that makes other people uncomfortable? Maybe you're afraid of being abandoned if you stop people-pleasing. But what if you're already abandoned by yourself every time you choose others' comfort over your own truth? Maybe you're afraid of success because it would require you to own your power instead of hiding behind your wounds, your trauma, your story of limitation. Maybe you're afraid of failure because it would confirm what you secretly believe, that you're not worthy of what you want. What if those fears aren't stop signs? What if they're invitations? What if they're your psyche's way of showing you exactly where your growth edge is? The shadow work isn't about eliminating fear. It's about walking with fear toward the person you're becoming. It's about doing the thing that scares you, not because you're brave, but because your soul is more afraid of staying small than it is of risking expansion. Every time you choose comfort over truth, you choose the cage over the key. Every time you choose being liked over being real, you choose performance over presence. Every time you choose safety over authenticity, you choose survival over thriving. The healing you're seeking isn't on the other side of perfection. It's not on the other side of having no more triggers, no more wounds, no more difficult emotions. It's on the other side of integration. It's on the other side of welcoming all the parts of yourself home. It's in the moment when you stop performing wellness and start embodying wholeness. When you stop trying to be the person everyone can handle and start being the person you actually are. When you stop apologizing for your complexity and start celebrating it. Take a breath. Feel into the parts of yourself you've been trying to fix, heal, or transcend. The angry part, the envious part, the lazy part, the needy part, the difficult part. What if they're not obstacles to your growth? What if they're the raw materials of your becoming? What if they're not evidence of your brokenness, but proof of your aliveness? You don't need to be saved from your shadow. You need to be reunited with it. You don't need to eliminate your darkness. You need to integrate it. You don't need to heal your way into wholeness. You need to remember that you were never broken in the first place. The journey we've taken together today, from recognizing your split self to embracing your shadow, this isn't just psychology. This is the path back to who you've always been underneath. All the performance, all the conditioning, all the ways you learned to make yourself acceptable to a world that fears authentic power. Carl Jung's psychology shows us that individuation, becoming whole, isn't about adding something new to yourself. It's about removing everything that isn't actually you. It's about coming home to the parts of yourself you abandoned in order to survive, in order to belong, in order to be loved. Your purpose isn't hidden in some external quest or career change or spiritual awakening. Your purpose is woven into the very contradictions you've been trying to resolve. It's embedded in the tensions you've been trying to eliminate. It's alive in the parts of yourself you've been taught to reject. You are both the light and the shadow, the healer and the one who needs healing, the giver and the one who deserves to receive, the person who understands everyone else's pain and the person whose pain deserves to be understood, the wise one and the wounded one, the strong one and the vulnerable one. You are not half a person trying to become whole. You are a whole person trying to remember that you were never actually broken. The shadow you meet is the self you reclaim, and that is where true healing begins. I want to leave you with this. What would happen if you stopped waiting for permission to be whole? What would happen if you stopped performing healing and started living it? This week, I invite you to take one small action from your shadow. Say the thing you're afraid to say. Set the boundary you're afraid to set. Honor the need you're afraid to have. Not because you're broken and need fixing, but because you're whole and ready for living. If this resonated with you, if you felt seen in ways that surprised you, share this with someone who might need to hear it. Sometimes, the greatest gift we can give someone is the mirror of recognition, the feeling that they're not alone in their complexity. And remember, the wound is not your identity. The healing is not your job. The wholeness is not your destination. You are already whole. You are already healed. You are already home. You just forgot for a while. Like this video, if it helped you remember something important about yourself. And if you're ready for more depth on your journey of integration, there are more explorations waiting for you here. The shadow you've been avoiding isn't your enemy. It's your ally. It's your teacher. It's your way back to the self you never actually lost. Welcome home.